I'm not a big fan of any taxes. All taxes, in effect, theft out of our working economy. We need a cap on how much our government spends relative to GDP, because right now our politicians are out of control.
And we're now going to get into the reason why we're here, and that is hearing from candidates running for Congressional District 20, which consists of portions of Broward as well as Palm Beach County. Sir Mike Termaya.
Thanks very much. It is absolutely a joy for me to participate in this group. Someone needs to be congratulated for putting together the partnership that you have here, Senator. I don't know which would be better, if the candidates were asked the questions or were asking the questions. The expertise that you've built into the group of folks joining you tonight is really impressive. And of course, it's a joy to be with so many wonderful candidates as well. People who have been dedicated to the community and raising children in this area. I've done that too. I put a couple of kids through the Broward public schools and the private schools in this area. Notwithstanding the mortgage on the house I had to get to afford the private school, right? I'm on my second career. I'm an economist. I worked for the White House for a couple of years as an economist and other federal agencies and other government agencies. Have a deep interest in the development of our economy, domestically and internationally, and in the issues surrounding poverty, what it takes to get out of poverty. I want to talk about that some tonight as well. I'm on my second career. I'm a police officer. I've been on patrol in Broward County for a little bit over 11 years. And one thing you find as a police officer in Broward County, if you weren't already an economist, it turns you into one, because you quickly see that some of the policies that we have in place are not helping people. And so as a member of the Libertarian Party, the one thing that I want to talk about tonight is changing some of our policies so that we can open up what I call liberty, what others call freedom, but we all need to call it opportunity. A lot of folks in this county, and in Palm Beach County and District 20 and all over South Florida need greater opportunities for economic development.
Bullard, my question today for you all is, there has been a crisis of overcriminalization and an unrestricted reliance on punitive force that has caused the problem of mass incarceration within our country. Although local jails and state prisons account for about 90%, 91% of the nation's incarcerated population, the federal government can lead a way into new solutions. So what would you do in Congress in order to incentivize that states reduce their prison populations? Thank you so much.
Hi, thanks for asking. As a member of the Libertarian Party, this is arguably our strongest bread and butter. We feel extremely strongly that we have overcriminalized a number of things. Mostly what we're talking about is victimless behavior, specifically the war on drugs. Look, as a police officer, one of the things that is most disappointing about my job is not just being directly involved with the criminalization of drugs, but what I would call indirectly. The number of people that don't call for help because they're afraid of what might happen. We have an opiate addiction problem in the United States. It's a big problem, and we need to treat it differently than criminalizing everything. You're right. That winds up in over-incarceration, which is a huge problem for our communities. And what it does to our communities is it breaks up our families and undermines our ability to achieve economic development. It's one of the reasons why our economy works so differently at the bottom rung of the ladder than it does everywhere else throughout our economy. Street crime comes from bad public policy in prosecuting the war on drugs. It has to stop. It has to stop first at the federal level, then it has to follow suit through the states. And history shows that states do follow federal leadership on these issues. So to begin with, we need federal legislation decriminalizing things. Obviously, we're starting out with marijuana, but drugs that are not addictive and not obviously as bad for people as alcohol is, right? These need to be decriminalized pronto. And then we can go stepwise from there. As a society, we get more comfortable with decriminalization. The other problem we have is that when it comes to sentencing, our sentences are much longer than other democracies around the world. This is a huge problem. It comes from the 96 crime bill. We were all optimistic it would work, right? Going back 25 years ago, but just didn't happen. It turns out that incarcerating people doesn't suppress street crime. It just breaks up communities.
If elected to Congress, what steps would you take to increase opportunities for renters to purchase homes, condos, or cooperative ownership models if they choose?
Thanks. I think it's my turn. I want to piggyback on a couple of things that Barbara said, because she said a couple of things that are really, really important. It is all about building up our wage rate. For housing to be affordable, we need to reconfigure the balance between how much money people make and how expensive it is. And I think that all too often we focus on how do we make housing cheaper, and there are important things that we can do about that. But the number one most important thing that we can do is to focus on our wage rate. No, it's not a minimum wage legislation that we need. It's to do things smarter with education, just like Barbara said. I'm a big advocate for making our public schools competitive. I believe that our public schools can be just as good as public schools elsewhere in the United States, and they're not right now. And part of the problem is that we don't have competition. The other things that we need to do are to bring investment into our community and other communities around the United States, because we have a mess of a tax code that makes it very difficult to create incentives for corporations to invest where it's best to do so. We also have problems with our zoning ordinances that make it very difficult to construct affordable housing. A couple other things that were said. We do have blighted communities, sections within our communities. That's an awful shame. Remember where they came from. The reason we have blight in the first place is bad public policy. We have been artificially forcing families into home ownership instead of affordable rental situations for a generation. And too often it doesn't work. There's few things worse than for a family than to fail in your first home ownership opportunity. We need to avoid that at all cost. So I do believe that there's things that we can do on both sides. Speaking of bad policy, I know my 2 minutes is up, but we need to stop this idea of precluding landlords from being able to do what they need to do to make a buck, because we're about to get into a situation where people don't want to make housing available in our district, and we can't have that. We can talk more about that later.
Reconciliation efforts passed in the House with $107 billion committed to providing a path to permanence for millions of immigrants. As a candidate running in a district that represents a vast number of TPS, DACA, and undocumented immigrants, what is your plan to lead on the battle for permanence and safety for our immigrant community?
Barbara's right. It's been going on for far, far too long. Look, immigration defines the United States, and not just in terms of where our nation came from, but where it's going. It's what defines the very cultural fabric in which we live. It is what America is all about. We need ongoing immigration. Yeah, if you've lived in this county long enough, you've had friends swept up in this program. Look, I've had members of my own family that have faced the type of fear that was just discussed a moment ago. It's something so profound you wouldn't wish it on your worst enemies. The reason we have this problem is not just an ethical problem. I believe that we need to discuss more openly among leading politicians at the federal level. But we also need to be able to face the truth that we need to surge resources to the border and to the vetting process. The reason we have these backlogs is because the government just takes far too long to process the immigrants that we are bringing into the country. We should be bringing more into the United States. It's good for our demographic composition. It's good for our economy. New immigrants are truly great Americans in the sense that they commit fewer crimes. They depend less on federal handouts. It's nothing but a favorable outcome for people who already live here in the United States, and there's no reason that we shouldn't be doing more of it. We need to be able to surge the resources to get it done. I'm not in favor, I know some of the other folks have been talking about this, of spending money in Latin America in order to encourage people to stay there. To get that done would be not just billions, but trillions of dollars. And if we learned anything about the past 20 years in Afghanistan, there's almost no amount of money you can spend to build up a country, to make it the kind of place where people would rather live than in the United States.
My question is the following. Lawmakers have introduced at least 389 restrictive bills in 48 states during the 2021 legislative sessions as an attempt to make it more difficult for the American people to participate in democracy. If elected, what do you commit to doing to protect the rights of voters from state laws that limit access to the ballot box, making it harder for working class people to be able to vote?
I think Barbara keeps going immediately before me just so she can hear me say she's right about that. And she is. We need to take very seriously not only all of the sacrifices that came before us for total universal enfranchisement, but we need to take very seriously what it's going to take to protect those rights. As a member of the Libertarian Party, this is truly our bread and butter. We believe in equal protection under the law, equal rights, and to protect everyone's liberty and access to democracy. There are a couple of approaches that I would take slightly differently, if I can offer them as such. Look, I don't think felons should be losing their right to vote in the first place. Not only do we need to work on restoration, but we need to make sure that they're not taken away in the future going forward. As far as voter registration, absolutely, it needs to be as easy as possible. I would go one step further. I would make it automatic. When you get your ID, you're automatically registered to vote. Indeed, I would make it a pain in the neck to get unregistered to vote. Not only would the government not be able to deregister individuals, but I would think that if you raised your hand and you said, I don't want to vote anymore, I want the government to say, whoa, not so easy. I think you should vote. In other words, I would put the onus on the individual to get unregistered. Look, we have problems in the United States. Something that we haven't talked about is why it's so difficult to get certain pieces of legislation enacted. What we haven't talked about is what's going on in the Republican Party. There are a number of people who I believe are not, look, I hate to speak for Republicans, I'm not one, but it's my observation that there are a number of people who are not necessarily acting out of animus, but a little bit of ignorance and a little bit of fear. And I think that as a strategic matter, we need to do a better job, we who are trying to protect everyone's right to vote. We need to do a better job on a strategic level of understanding what those fears are. That doesn't mean that we're going to make it difficult for ballots to be returned. Barbara is absolutely right. We need to make it as easy as possible and up until the last minute to register. But I do think that we need to open our minds and our hearts and our ears and listen to what some of those problems are, because on a strategic level, we're not getting anything done if we just run around calling everyone else idiots and try to convince ourselves that they have colder hearts than we do. So just some long-term advice there.
To it. We went through two major tax reforms in 2017 and 2019, which had negative impacts on economic disparity in America. According to the Nonpartisan Tax Policy Center, more than 60% of the tax savings went to the people in the top 20% of the economic ladder. This measure also slashed corporate taxes by 40%. So my question to you, what tax changes would you vote in favor of? But then also, which would you oppose and why?
I'm not a big fan of any taxes. All taxes, in effect, theft out of our working economy. We need a cap on how much our government spends relative to GDP, because right now our politicians are out of control. The debt that we have accumulated is now greater than our national income, and that's getting passed on to future generations, and not just the wealthy. That is a hammer on our middle class and our low and moderate income folks for generations to come. When we talk about corporate income tax, I think that sometimes we get a little bit confused. All taxes are borne by human beings eventually. And when we tax a corporation, that's going to come out not just from the owners or wealthy managers. It comes out of the labor wage rate, and it comes out in higher prices for our products. I would find it a lot more ethically honest if we would just say we want to tax wealthy people more and completely zero out corporate income tax if we could raise the same amount of money. We need to make it a more competitive and welcoming environment in this country for people to want to invest here, because that's how to drive up our wage rate. And the real way to increase wealth in the lower and middle classes is through a higher wage rate. It is not through creating incentives for home ownership. It is not by getting more money out of the federal government or the state government spent on this program or that program and just giving it to families. We need to build up families' abilities to earn money through a higher wage rate. That comes from investment, and that comes from a more welcoming environment for businesses.
For a closeout, I'm asking for one word. The reason I say one word is that when we think about our American political system, oftentimes we associate one word with individuals that oftentimes has more meaning and more significance than any policy proposal that you may have come up with, or any long form speech that person may have given.
Liberty.
All right.